October 30th, 2012 was the day that George Lucas officially sold Lucasfilm to Disney. Not just Star Wars, but also anything under the Lucasfilm purview, including Indiana Jones. And there was a lot of excitement. Obviously, the sequel trilogy movies that garnered a lot of attention straight away. But ultimately, here we are, 11 years later, and the legacy of Disney Star Wars is failure and apathy. The legacy of Disney Star Wars over a decade after this sale is one of complete and utter woke failure. In fact, Kathleen Kennedy is now the face of that. Kathleen Kennedy is the face of woke Hollywood failure. Whether it's race swapping, whether it's gender swapping, whether it's just put a woman in it and make it lame and gay, Kathleen Kennedy, as South Park just demonstrated, is now acceptable for pretty much everybody to point at and laugh, because that's what has happened to Disney Star Wars. We heard a lot of people that hung on to hope, even after things like The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. They thought, well, this person's going to save the franchise. Well, no, actually, this person's going to save the franchise. None of that was true. None of that was reality, because Disney Star Wars is Disney Star Wars. It's not George Lucas's Star Wars, regardless of how many people want to gaslight others or themselves into believing some people at that company actually want to hang on to George Lucas's Star Wars. And now Ahsoka is really the nail in the coffin, the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people to finally come to the realization that people are not paying attention to this anymore. Apathy has set in when it comes to Star Wars. It happens to be setting in for Marvel right around the same time. Star Wars streaming series Ahsoka ends with a whimper. That's a pretty good way to describe it. And even it started with a whimper, to be honest with you. If you remember when it started, something with a known character that was pushed so hard by people at Disney, by people at Lucasfilm, changing the release date and time to be a primetime event on Disney Plus, they went all out for Ahsoka, including theatrical releases in the middle of the season. Didn't matter. Didn't seem to be a lot of interest in it. In fact, the Ahsoka series started off pretty much on par with Andor in terms of how many households it reached. Now, certainly there's people that have good feelings about Andor, but in terms of the general Star Wars fan base, not a ton of people were actually interested in that. And they were thinking, with all the keys we're jangling, bringing back Anakin, bringing back all these different characters, the Ahsoka series is going to do way better than that, right? It absolutely did not. And now we're finding out that the finale of Ahsoka couldn't even match up to Andor. Ahsoka finale viewership clocks in worse than Andor that was chasing the audience. And you can see right here, Ahsoka with a fairly similar runtime for the finale, almost 100 million minutes less than Andor. Now, you can put in some comparisons and say, well, Andor had a couple more episodes. Maybe more people were rewatching those in between. Potentially. I guess that's possible. Either way, Ahsoka failed to crack the top 10 in streaming, period, other than its debut week where it did 2 episodes at the same time. Ahsoka is a massive failure for Disney Star Wars. It's an indictment on Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni, the entire Filoni Favreau Mandoverse, that there's just not as much interest as they expected. 11 years after this moment, after George Lucas sells it to Disney, with the assumption that they treat it with respect, with the assumption that they listen to some of the things he had to say, the legacy of Disney Star Wars and really Lucasfilm in general, Disney Lucasfilm, is one of abject failure and apathy.